Well, joining us now from Washington is the former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton. He's written a book called Surrender is Not an Option, Defending America at the United Nations and Abroad. Mr. Ambassador, it's always a pleasure to have you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me today.
What do you think about Pakistan and their nukes? Do you think there's a chance that the radical Islamic groups would take control of that arsenal?
Well, I think there's a chance, and maybe more than a chance. I think the Central American strategic interest here has to be keeping those nuclear weapons safe and secure, because if a fundamentalist regime took over, it would be where Iran wants to be and will be probably in a few years, but with a capability that could destabilize all of that part of the world and as well have the risk that these nuclear weapons could be transferred, some of them to al-Qaeda or to other terrorist groups. So this is a very dangerous situation. What
do we do? I mean, we're riding one horse named Musharraf, but Benazir Bhutto had a horrible record of human rights when she was prime minister and corruption. So who do we go to?
Well, I think it's important for everyone to understand this is not a case of the white hats for democracy on one side and the black hats for martial law and the military on the other. It's a very complex situation. Musharraf is no Jeffersonian Democrat, no doubt about that, but he does control the military, and that is the force the people in Pakistan themselves call the steel skeleton that holds the country together. And in the short term, I don't think we have any choice. You know, Benazir Bhutto is well known in the United States, but as the leader of her party, the People's Party, her title is chairperson for life. Hardly a democratic title.
Well, what about this conference they're setting up in Annapolis with all these things happening in the Middle East? Why in the world are we going in this quixotic quest, if you will, to bring peace between Israel and the Palestinians?
I think this is another dangerous policy. I'm sad to see the Bush administration pursuing it. I can't really understand the motives other than the legacy project sort of approach, but it's the least propitious time for a peace conference between Arabs and Israelis I can imagine. You have a weak and divided Israeli government. On the Palestinian side, the Palestinian Authority is broken, perhaps irreparably. You have the terrorist group Hamas in control of Gaza, the former terrorist group Fatah on the West Bank. There's no Palestinian leader who can make commitments that he can follow through on. So this conference, which may be announced as soon as today for next week in Annapolis, is very risky for the United States. If we fail, if nothing comes out of it, it's not simply the way it was the day before the conference. It will be perceived as a failure of American influence, and that's always a bad thing in the Middle East.
You've had some harsh criticism of the State Department, and so have I. What is wrong with them for doing a thing like this? It seems to be utter folly.
Well, you know, I think, and I describe this in my new book, it's a cultural problem at the State Department. It's built up over decades. The Foreign Service, which has many dedicated, sincere, well-educated people in it, but they have come as a group to the view that basically they should run foreign policy, and you have these inconvenient elected presidents every once in a while, but the Foreign Service goes on. And this attitude that they're reflecting now is the same attitude they had 10 or 15 years ago. The tragedy for the Bush administration is that point of view has now predominated.
I understand even Jack Kennedy had trouble with it. It isn't just something recent.
Well, you know, I was recently at a debate at Francis Marion University in Florence, South Carolina, with Andy Young, who was the Carter administration's first ambassador to the UN. And to listen to him talk about his troubles with the State Department brought a smile to my face, because I saw many of the same things.
What about the United Nations? We have compulsory exactions, I guess you'd call it, of money. What process would make it better?
Well, you know, I worked hard for UN reform when I was up there, and I described a lot of that in the book. But the one conclusion I came away with is that efforts at marginal change at the UN will be ineffective. Every time you fix one thing, another problem emerges. So I conclude that the only real solution is to move to voluntary contributions, to get away from mandatory or assessed contributions, where the U.S. is far and away the largest contributor. 22% of the cost of most UN programs, 27% of peacekeeping. We ought to pay for what we want and insist that we get what we pay for. That's not a revolutionary principle, except at the UN.
You know, Jesse Helms wanted that when he was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, but for some reason there seems to be a tremendous feeling, at least among the Democrats, that we should just keep on paying. What is the problem?
Well, you know, it's easy to spend somebody else's money, and that's what happens in New York and the other UN cities, and that 22% becomes a kind of entitlement. And it breeds a sort of entitlement mentality that is not conducive to effectiveness or transparency or responsiveness. I think the Democrats are afraid if you actually judged UN programs on their effectiveness, many would come up wanting, whereas the ones that are already funded by voluntary contributions, like UNICEF that we're all familiar with, the World Food Program, where the U.S. typically gives more than 50% of the food. These are much more effective organizations because the leadership knows if they don't deliver, governments will take their money elsewhere.
That's the free market. Mr. Ambassador, thank you again. It's called Surrender is Not an Option. It's, I understand, about number 15 on the New York Times bestseller list, and it's available in bookstores or on Amazon. And today, I understand, also is your birthday, so I think we can wish you happy, what is it, 59th birthday?
It is.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much.